Welcome to Purpose 360. I'm Carol Cohn, your host, and today I have such an honor to have a great conversation with Tracy, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer of Colgate-Palmolive. Welcome to the show, Anne.
Thank you, Carol. And like you said, I'm surprised we haven't done this before. I'm delighted to be here with you.
Well, I'm thrilled. And I have to start out by saying I am an inveterate Colgate Optic White user. I love the brand. It's great. And also Hills and Murphy's. You've got some wonderful, wonderful brands. So it's great to have a 220-year-old company represented by someone who's been with the firm over 3 decades.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. And also I love the fact you've got 4 kids, 2 cats, 3 dogs. So you are constantly probably testing the products and getting lots of smiles, because in your new logo, it's about making more smiles.
Yes, that's what we're all about. And we hope to continue to do that another 200 years.
And I know you will, because it's such an amazingly thoughtful company. So I'd love to start out with just, what are the experiences in your background, your upbringing? I know that you are an engineer by your training, but some of that really molded you to go into this sustainability career.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, I've been at Colgate a very long time. And I think those of you in your audience would know that sustainability has evolved over the years. And when I first started my career at Colgate, I moved into the supply chain. Maybe a quick history into before Colgate, I actually worked in the defense industry for a few years.
Really?
And what I learned was I didn't like that, because depending on your clearance level, you really couldn't see the whole picture of what you were working on, building, making. So I went back to grad school in engineering and then joined Colgate. And I was immediately drawn to fast moving consumer goods, FMCG as we call it, or consumer goods world, because you could go to the store and see what you made, because I was in manufacturing for many years, to see what you made right on the shelf. And I love that. And I love just the pace of change, the constant innovation. And as you mentioned earlier, the iconic brands that we work on that are tremendous and fun. So those were and the supply chain, many engineers went into supply chain. And of course, along the years, and we kind of have our own map of the evolution of sustainability at Colgate, which really started with environmental compliance, and then it grew into the mid 2000s of, the awareness of the science of climate change, but not hyper awareness, and starting to see some of the targets come into place, and the SBTI, as we call it, Science-Based Target Initiative, emerge in the mid 20-teens, if you will. And then fast forward to today, many companies are part of that net zero commitment and have initiatives and targets. And I think we're in an era now, and we'll talk more about this, of now we got to, we are in implementation phase. We are in action phase.
Right.
And
yep.
We are understanding what it really takes to do that. And so sustainability as a profession, it's really been around for a good decade, but it's really evolved and changed over that time frame. And, and we can't ignore kind of what's going on in the world around us, including the emergence of AI. So, we're managing alongside of all these other big geopolitical things. So it's a fun place to be, because it's always changing. But I'm sure we'll get into that a bit more.
And you have also traveled, you've worked all around the world and throughout your career at Colgate, and curious about being engaged with so many different brands, manufacturing, supply chain, different cultures. How has that shaped your high level view of sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, living in the world on the one hand is a small place. On the other hand, it's a big place, right? And you have to meet, and I feel so fortunate to have worked on or with almost every geographical division that that Colgate is, well, we're in 200, we sell our products in 200 countries, so we're all over the world. But what you learn to appreciate is the difference in the cultures, and particularly when it comes to sustainability. I think that's where it's come together for me. You have to meet them where they're at. And there's vast differences in how Asia thinks of sustainability, even how South Pacific, so Australia, thinks about it versus Europe, of course, versus Latin America. So, what myself and my team do is we engage with each of those geographies and their leaders, and we meet them with where they're at and understand what their needs are. And that changes culture by culture, infrastructure by infrastructure. So having been on the ground and lived and worked in those places really gives me an appreciation for that. And I think you can't replace that kind of firsthand knowledge.
And I'm just curious, what is the size and shape of your team?
I think we're sized appropriately relative to, I do a lot of benchmarking on this topic, to my peer companies, based on kind of the breadth and where they are. We have a relatively small team that's focused on 3 core areas. One is the climate program, which includes all things water and dealing with the supply chain. And then a few people who work on product sustainability and the brands. I now have a commercial person on my team, which has been tremendous. That's relatively new. And then we have a few people that work on the social kind of coordinating the social impact in the well-being of our employees. That we call that driving social impact. But we also work very closely with people embedded in the business, which is really important, because that's our mantra, is to embed it in the business. And we've even in the recent past given a headcount from our team and put it in the supply chain.
Great.
And they take that work with them, so to speak. So if you just blow out, and I've done this exercise back of the envelope, it's not an exact science, but the number of people, I'm not going to use numbers, but there's a much bigger group of people that are working in the divisions, in the geographical divisions, and in the global functions. So we really kind of have this community across,
which is great.
Yeah,
which is great. Which is how you're so effective. So I like to start with your purpose. And your purpose statement: reimagining a healthier future for all people, their pets, my fave, and our planet.
Yeah, mine too.
Can you share how the purpose integrates into the business strategy and how you bring it to life? And then we're going to get into the specific sustainability initiatives.
Sure. Yeah. So, that our purpose, don't underestimate the power of purpose. It's incredibly important. And it's not just lip service. And I would dare say every single person working, 34,000 people working at Colgate, know, if you were to walk up to them, they know that purpose. And I think they understand what that means. So reimagining a healthier future for all people, their pets, and our planet. I mean, it's a simple statement, but it really is the North Star for what I would call our business growth strategy. And we build these kind of strategic frameworks in 5-year buckets. We just sunsetted 2025. So we're working on our strat plan for 2030. And I'm talking about the business plan, right? And it's clearly the North Star. So our growth initiatives are kind of how we think of our superpowers, if you will, what's special to Colgate that will enable that, and hone our kind of key initiatives to drive our growth, sit there. And then underneath all of that is what we call transformative enablers. And sustainability is one of the transformative enablers, next to operational excellence and AI, of course. So we really, that North Star sits right on top, and it is the guide for everything we do underneath. It also is a beautiful guide for what we call our sustainability and social impact strategy, which is, if you double click into sustainability as an enabler, then you get into how we're bringing that to life through our 2030, specifically our sustainability and social impact strategy.
So you talk about sustainability being now it's a transformative enabler
Yeah.
of your business strategy. What happened internally? It didn't one day, your CEO didn't just wake up and say, "Okay, sustainability, you're now in the C-suite." So I know you've worked so diligently in your career to move this from actions to strategy. So, was there something that happened that you can share with our listeners, or a cadence of things that happened that all of a sudden you were much more part of the business strategy?
I think, I think it starts with understanding the key stakeholders, and we have many. Okay. Sustainability is something that everybody cares about, arguably, whether they realize it or not in some form or fashion. So, the key stakeholders that we have to answer to are our investors. We still continue to have strong interest and questions from our investors. They do consider the work we're doing for a company like ours a fiduciary responsibility to understand the future risks and even opportunities related to climate events and things like this, and where the world's going from a regulatory standpoint. And likewise, our customer, we call the retailers, like the Walmarts of the world, the Carrefours and so forth, we call those our customers, and they care, and they're, we ladder up to what they sell on the shelf. So they care a lot. And, Walmart has their Project Gigaton. And so we also have to answer to them. And then by extension, of course, our consumers, which is our lifeblood to driving our business growth. So the consumers, of course, and then our employees, which I personally consider our most important stakeholder.
Yes, that's great.
That's 4,000 have to make all this work happen, and they're our ambassadors or champions for what we do. So those are just a few. I mean, there's NGOs as well, but I think this understanding the stakeholders and kind of lining our strategy up to meet each one of those where they're at is critical as well. And there wasn't, when you asked me the question, there wasn't like a kind of aha moment. I don't think it was more of a build on moving from ambition, setting targets, to building the roadmaps to get there, to now action and implementation, and bringing those stakeholders along the way. Now, one thing that I think a little bit, I don't know if I'd call it aha or not, but I think that's been very critical to helping us, continually improve and move the needle forward on our targets, is the fact that we have this sustainability and social impact strategy. And I still remember we started from a blank sheet of paper back when we were developing our 25 strategy, completely blank sheet of paper, working with our CEO, with Noel Wallace. And the first go around, there was a lot there. And he said, we need to make it simpler. And I really learned that making something simple is very hard.
Yes.
So we did, he pushed us, and I think we ended up in a better place. And even beyond that, I learned somewhere along the way the power of focus. And, when there's so much to get done, you have to help the organization focus, and you have to be relentless and repetitive around, this is what drives the business. These are the things, these are the initiatives, the actions where we want to lead. And then these other ones we have to do, but we're going to be followers or fast followers.
There you go.
So I use a metaphor. People have heard me say this is swords and shields. Swords are where we want to lead. Shields are what we have to do because of taxes, fees, reputational risks, those types of things. So really getting the organization anchored behind the swords is critical. And for us, it's really oral health. Although in the case of Hills, they have their food, shelter, love program. So, it's helping people and pets have longer lives and be healthier. So that's critical to what we do. And then it's around plastic. We have an action called Eliminate Plastic Waste. We're very dedicated to the work we're doing there. And then climate and the work we're doing around climate that we think is critically important for our long-term resilience. Those are
So
yeah.
And so you're consistent in terms of your writings and your CR report talking about focus, which is great. I'd love you to go deeper into the swords and shields philosophy and give an example of one of your favorite initiatives that does that, because it's very powerful and it is focused.
Well, I guess the best example of all is in the first area of oral health. I mean, we have a very long-standing program called Bright Smiles, Bright Futures. It's been around about as long as I have at Colgate, a little over 30 years. And basically we aim to bring oral health and hygiene education, even in some cases treatment, to children and their families around the world. And we do that through school programs. We do it through dental vans, depending on where you are in the world. And we do this all over the world in communities all over the world, including the US. And there's so many, kind of myth busters around oral health, which is starting to come to light, which is exciting for us. But oral cavities, or caries as we call it, is the number one disease in children around the world. And it can have devastating effects on children, pain, lack of confidence. It can have a lot of knock-on negative effects. And oral health, it's been now, don't quote me on this, 3 or 4, maybe even 5 years ago, that the World Health Organization finally recognized, and this was on the behest of some of the work we were doing, recognize oral health as a leading indicator to your overall health.
Gateway to your health. Yes.
Yeah,
healthy
and
life,
there's been a lot more we've read about that since then, but one thing leads to another. So, but it can be an indicator, and the microbiome in your mouth changes when you have different disease elements present in your body and things like this. So it can be a real clue to doctors or nurses or, if dentists pick it up, that something's not right. So this is important. And most recently, last December, we formalized a partnership with the World Health Organization Foundation to work alongside them to further promote. So we're escalating Bright Smiles, Bright Futures, or that initiative around oral health. So I think, to me, that's one of the best examples of, and if you go back to kind of this era around value creation that we're in right now, which we'll get into in a minute, that's the right place for us as a business to lead.
Totally.
Because we are the leading oral health business in the world. We sell, we like to say, I have a joke sometimes when I'm in an audience, I ask everybody to raise their hand, how many of you brushed your teeth with Colgate today? And half the people raise their hands, because we're in about half the households around the world. So that's why.
And you're using your scale for tremendous impact. You've reached over 2 billion. I see that you've kind of set a goal, 2.7 billion by 2030. And I'd love to know, because the best initiatives have longevity if you're really going to get to scale.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And I'd love to know, how did it stick? Was it because Colgate was in so many homes and was logical? Because, as you know, you get a new brand manager or leader and they go, oh, no, I want to do something different. I want something that I can have a legacy. But your program, it started in 1991, which is amazing. That, it's like longevity with your longevity. It sticks, it stays, it scales. And why does that happen at Colgate?
Well, no one's ever asked me that directly, but I can give you my point of view. I think what's not to like about it is a simple answer.
Great answer.
It's, I think we all show up for work every day, and we don't always think about it. Maybe a better way to say it. We take for granted the fact that the products we make are good for people. They're all about health. And that's a great place to work. That's a great organization to be part of. And this just takes it to another level. And we may get into my win-win-win principle, but it clearly is the best demonstration of win-win-win, because, you're helping people, and when you're engaging children and helping them have a healthier mouth and giving them product to take home enough for their family to use, and helping their family learn about the importance of oral health. Now you've done something for them that's, going to add to longevity, to make them more comfortable, whatever the case may be. And that's very positive. That's positive for the consumer. And let's hope you've developed a loyal user now. You've developed another Colgate user around the world. And there's still a lot of opportunity to grow penetration, meaning how many houses we're in, as well as frequency, that a lot of people don't brush their teeth or prescribe 2 minutes a day, twice a day. So there's still a lot of opportunity to grow.
A lot of growth.
And the second, so with that, that's a good tee up to why it can be good for business. I mean, let's just say that we are a business. So we have opportunity to grow there. And then finally, I mean, it has a tremendous social impact. So at scale. So it's a perfect win-win-win type of example for us.
And you must be reading my notes, because first I was going to ask about swords and shields, which you did, and now the win-win-win framework. How long have you had the win-win-win framework?
Well, I think I kind of most actively started talking about that as we were developing and rolling out our 2030 strategy. So we can talk about let me talk about our sustainability and social impact strategy just for a second. So
please,
when we, 2025 was coming up. So we gathered in 24 to 25 timeframe the subject matter experts around the world who work with us on this, because we certainly don't. My small team doesn't do this in a vacuum. We heavily depend on almost every function in the company to help us get this done. So we had representatives there, workshopped, and basically what we ended up with was, for 2030, a strategy. We didn't start from a blank sheet of paper. We built on the learnings from the 2025 strategy. We sharpened it. We made the targets much more specific and measurable. And, at the end, I was saying this is an evolution, not a revolution. The new news was really around being more rigorous to tie the targets, the initiatives and targets, to value drivers. So really entering an era of value creation. And my peers are all saying the same thing. So I'm not alone in this. But that's kind of where the win-win-win was born. And to try to really start to pivot the discussion from doing these initiatives, whatever it may be, Regen Ag project, or doing a specific project in a manufacturing plant, to which helps our energy or electricity efficiencies. We don't want. I honestly don't want people running around saying, "Oh, I just did this and I improved my scope 2." I want people to say, I did this and I improved our efficiency in the business, or I protected the resilience of the supply of this material, whether it's corn, soy, whatever it is. And by the way, as an outcome, we reduced our emissions, and that was a good thing. So we're driving impact at scale, but we're doing it by bettering the business first. So that's kind of how the win-win-win thing. So it's win for the consumer first, builds brand trust. If the consumer has brand trust, then you build brand loyalty. That's a win for the company, for the business. And only if you do those two things well, then you have a healthy flywheel from a business standpoint. Then you drive impact at scale for the planet. So, and I'm not going to name names, but there's examples of companies out there that have struggled as a business, and that has a negative effect on impact at scale for them, for the planet. So I think it's so important to put business first, and then with always in mind of, we have the initiatives in place to reach our targets, and that helps us to be more successful. So that's kind of how our strategy has evolved and where we're headed. And so, we have more, like I said, streamlined, more measurable targets now that the company can relate to.
Yeah, no, that you're again, your upbringing going through the supply chain and then evolving to value creation. It's brilliant in terms of getting, and then also the simplification, the
Mm-hmm.
win-win-win, the swords and the shields. And your point about simplify so people can get it is so powerful. I want to talk about another thing that I see you're doing so well, but you're challenged. And this is about you save energy, you're saving packaging through maybe different plastic, and you talk about avoidance of cost. And I
Mm-hmm.
love the fact that you said in some of your writings that you avoided over $1 billion, wow, of energy costs. And
Over,
so,
yeah,
yeah,
since we've been measuring it, yeah, which is over a long period of time, but it is pretty astounding. Yeah.
it is astounding. So I'm sure you're a tiny bit frustrated. I'm frustrated for you because it's not on the balance sheet. It's not like a brand is on the balance sheet. And then
Yeah.
some of that brand value, you specifically got this amazing result. So, how are you discussing that with your finance colleagues internally first so they at least are going to recognize it? And then is there anything happening externally in, because I know you do coalitions.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I want you to talk a bit about this toothpaste tube innovation because that's amazing. But let's just talk about this avoidance issue because it's frustrating that it's not getting credited to the balance sheet.
Well, yeah, I mean, and so cost avoidance is always, yes, a sensitive subject because it doesn't directly hit the P&L, as you say. So how do you kind of factor that in business and decision making, right? And
Right.
justifying projects, because the traditional way that we justify savings projects is through an ROI, and if it's not hitting the P&L, it doesn't meet the traditional ROI definition.
Right.
So that's kind of, so getting back to how do we bring the win-win-win to life? And
Right.
remember, I said the 2030 strategy was an evolution, not a revolution. And the new news, if you will, for our 2030 strategy, which I'm trying to get across, and if you will, I'm marketing it through win-win-win, but saying that value creation is the new news. It's now we're being much more deliberate around tying everything we do to value drivers. And I even go so far as to say, if we can't articulate the value driver, we shouldn't be doing it. Now,
Okay.
avoidance can be a value driver.
Mhm.
And, I have a great CFO who embraces this and understands that and recognizes that avoidance should be a decision maker in a project. And it comes up in a few places, like you mentioned, as we drive more efficiency, we use less electricity, we avoid, energy costs. Another example is, I don't know how many of your audience would be familiar with these things called EPR fees. It's a terrible acronym, extended producer responsibility, but it's the fees that companies like us pay for the amount of plastic we use. And these fees are going up exponentially around the world. Right. They've been in Europe a long time, but now they're all over Canada. They're growing in the US and in other parts of the world. And, if we can improve the design, use less plastic, use less virgin plastic, make things more recyclable, all of these things help us to avoid EPR fees. So these are things that should help us to make decisions when we decide, should we do this project or not? So this is precisely why, with this new news in hand, we rolled out the 2030 strategy. In parallel, we have been working on developing this, what we call value creation framework, or a tool that sustainability kind of leaders or champions around the company can use to articulate, I have this project. Is it we break it down like this: dollars generated, dollars saved, or dollars protected. And by the way, for us, dollars avoided fits up under dollars protected. So it forces them to articulate the project. It's a very simple template. In those, which is the lead value driver or value creation category. And then there's, as you can imagine, some kind of a framework that they have to fill out to kind of get them there, and put it in more kind of business speak or language that our finance community can relate to. And in some cases, particularly under dollars protected, we might do estimates. It's directional. It could be directional. It could be qualitative, as we say, not quantitative. In other cases, it can be very hard dollars. There are savings projects. But a lot of times, particularly with products, when you introduce new products that are in some way more sustainable, maybe using a less carbon intensive material, because that material we're sourcing hasn't scaled yet, it's probably more expensive. And so there is a perception, not wrong, that sometimes more sustainable products are more expensive. But once you scale, and we know how to do that, we know how to scale things and cut costs, so we can improve that. And the other thing is you can't just always pass that on to the consumer. So that's something we have to wrestle with as a company. And the other thing is to buy responsible materials that might be certified or something. There's often a premium associated with that. So there is cost involved, but it's just how, you have to weigh out have to weigh out many factors and manage the trade-offs. So of course we want to use responsibly sourced palm oil. I mean, goes without saying. All of our peers do that. We need to do that. So there's ways that we manage that and manage the costs accordingly. So it's kind of managing these trade-offs, and but then articulating the benefits of some of the projects we have through this value creation framework. And really, I think sometimes, particularly the people closest to sustainability, don't realize they're speaking a language nobody else can understand. So we're trying to help them, to giving them frameworks to help them articulate things different. This is nothing new here. We've always known some of the things we do have value, but we don't. This is a more disciplined, robust way of articulating it.
And I love that, you're disciplined. You're a great communicator. In addition to all of the material knowledge and such, you're a great communicator, and you're good with people. So bravo and kudos to you. I love you said that people win when we innovate. And innovation is a huge part of your job and the company's commitment. Can you please share the recyclable toothpaste tube journey? I was fascinated by it. You discussed it at Climate Week 2025, but our listeners, it has such a great ending too, in terms of how you brought others in. You brought a coalition. So please share it. And it's not over as well.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that because you said it has a great ending, but it's really not over yet. It is truly a journey, one that started honestly around 2015. When we first said we were going to make all of our packaging recyclable. And as you can imagine, toothpaste tubes are a huge part of our business, and a huge part of our packaging portfolio. So, and not all tubes. So very quickly, the original tube that most toothpaste use, and tubes are ubiquitous too. They're in condiments, they're in shampoos and things like this, personal care products. But the toothpaste tube was multi-layers of different kinds of plastic, different types of plastic, with aluminum layer in the middle to protect the fluoride and the flavor. And so, as you can imagine, that's not recyclable because it's got all kinds of things mixed together. So our own internal engineers set about to design a tube. The goal was to make a mono-material plastic tube. So one type of plastic that was already kind of readily accepted in recycling. And so he chose HDPE, which is the number 2 or rigid plastic that is in milk jugs or fabric softener bottles. And he had to make it feel like a tube, and that's a very rigid plastic. And he had to protect what was inside first and foremost, because that's why the aluminum had been there. So it took him several years to get it right and to go through all the testing. And he didn't do that in a vacuum. We worked with the American APR, American Plastic Recyclers Association, who kind of were at least in the US, the authorities on what is or isn't recyclable. And even some suppliers were working on something similar at the time. But anyway, we were the first company, because we make a lot of our own tubes, the first tube to get accepted by APR as recyclable. And then since then, other suppliers have followed and everything. But it was a very important moment and step for us. And then we made the commitment to roll that out across every brand, sub-brand that we make around the world. So that process, by the way, took 5 years, and we got done a little early, but it was really right up until 2025 that we got them all rolled out for the most part. And we did take the decision, to your point, very early on, that if Colgate toothpaste tubes were the only tubes that were recyclable, now you're getting into the infrastructure side of things. That would be, we wouldn't be able to enjoy tubes that would be recyclable in practice and at scale, because the MRFs, material recovery facilities, would be like, well, I'm not going to sort this tube from that tube.
Too difficult, right? Yeah.
So we really needed all tubes to kind of move together. So, we with lots of oversight from our legal team, we like to say we inspired, or we developed a technical deck that we could share with lots of different tube producers around the world, and encourage, we couldn't tell people what to do, of course, but encourage others to move to an HDPE tube. And not surprising, I shouldn't use that word, but pleasingly, I guess is the word I was looking for, many did adopt that format and agreed that that was the right thing to do. So we hired a third-party independent company along the way to measure the transition, because they could independently understand kind of which tubes have moved to the new format. We focus in the US first, because that's where there's the infrastructure, in Europe. And so some quick stats, if I get them right, but they're fairly impressive. I think
they're very impressive.
2025, I think, it was probably sooner than that. But at least in 2025, I could say that 95% of all toothpaste tubes had moved to this new format, and 75% of all tubes, so not just toothpaste. So that the importance of those figures in the US is the fact that, we have an interesting recycling infrastructure in the US. We have thousands of independent MRFs, but we also have big companies like Republic and Waste Management, or they call themselves WM now. And, the goal is to get them to accept the tube as truly recyclable, put it into their specs, their reprocessing specifications. So they, of course, understandably wouldn't want to do that until there was a critical mass. So now there is, and, that's where we're at. This has to be repeated around the world, and there's different infrastructure in place around the world, and there's different initiatives we're involved in to try to build infrastructure around the world. But, we're a partner with Ellen. You mentioned coalitions, but Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who has a strong focus on plastic waste. We're very tightly connected with the work they're doing, and we work with them and with other companies through Ellen MacArthur Foundation to drive this change. And they've been great thought leaders and helping to drive a lot of this change around the world.
And then also, and it's scaled. I mean, it costs more but now you've gotten it to the point of scaling. So your it's neutral.
Yeah. So that was one of our internal commitments when we very first rolled out the new tube. As we said earlier, when something's new, until you scale it, it costs more. So we made an internal commitment to get it back to cost neutral. That we did do a year earlier, ahead of schedule. And I wouldn't put a dollar figure on it, but we've calculated, not as precisely as I would like, but we have done, as you know, some figures around the amount of EPR fees we've avoided due to, it's called eco-modulation. By moving to a recyclable tube, we've avoided a lot of EPR fees.
So it's a tremendous story. And the fact that psychologically you would have a coalition, you'd make it open source. That's a big
we like to
statement.
say we like to say we shared the technology. That's what we call it. Yeah.
But you still, and it's probably more than 5 years. I mean, you stuck with this. This was not a one and done. So kudos to I didn't know about it as a user. I now love the product even more. So
that's right. And
every morning
we're not like. You raised a good point though. We if you noticed, because a lot of people don't know it. We haven't really talked about it with consumers yet, because we have to get that infrastructure piece nailed down first.
Is it, dare I say, because I know we're all a fan of Tide cold water, because that was a great
that was
innovation.
I admire that. Yes.
Yeah. But I feel better. And the fact of when I know about it, now of course I'm in the business, but I'm going to feel better every time that I'm using your product. So kudos to you. I would love to ask of other CSOs or wanting to be a CSO, and they need to change. I was going to say one sentence, but that's really hard. Maybe a bit of the communication with your CFO and or your board, so that what would that be? And I know you wrote a wonderful article in the Harvard Business Review. We're going to put a link to that in our show notes about language and things like that. But what's your recommendation to other CSOs out there who maybe aren't getting the great successes that you have, and also, they're part of the senior leadership team?
Well, I mean, I think I'll go back to, but I'll reinforce the point around whether you're engaging with your senior team, the leaders of the company, the operational leaders of the company, or the board. The most important thing is to articulate the long-term commercial growth opportunities, or how you're managing risk for the company, and the long-term resilience. Whatever the story may be, always start with that, because they can relate to that, and they understand that language, and then you can come back to, and this is how it contributes to meeting our targets. Always lead with the business case. I mean, it sounds simple, but it isn't simple. And I'm, my lifelong mission now, at least in my remaining time here, is that to help my team, my young team. I have a very terrific, amazingly talented younger team. Help them to understand and learn that principle and make them better business partners. That's what I want to do. And so that, so they can do the same thing. And that's just, you have to, that's what win-win is. So you have to start with that.
So does someone who aspires to be Ann Tracy in the future, do they have to go and get an engineering degree? Do they need to get an MBA? What's your recommendation to the younger generation who wants to do this kind of work?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to say you have to get an MBA or anything like that, but I do think you have to arm yourself with good foundational business knowledge, not just be a environmental kind of advocate. That's good too, but you have to put those two together if in a corporate setting, if that's where you want to be successful. I'm in the process right now. I mentioned my talented young team of curating some internal business training for them. I went to my CFO and I said, I want to get my team trained up. Where do I start? And they just revamped a terrific course that I actually took a long time ago. It's I won't share internal names, but it's a basic course that kind of helps you as a leader or an early in career person navigate the P&L and the balance sheet at Colgate and the language we use and what impacts what, how are the ratios related, all of that stuff. And so that's where we're going to start. We're going to do it as a team building exercise.
Oh,
and
nice.
They don't know this yet, so I don't know when this is airing, but I have to tell them.
You better well, it's going to air later this month.
Okay.
August,
well, I'll tell them before that. I'll tell them before that.
We don't want them to know via a podcast.
But so to answer your question, if someone joins a company young in career, be hungry and curious about and learn about, how if, listen to the quarterly earnings reports if you're in a public company, start to educate yourself on what drives the business. And that'll be a good starting point.
That's great. I also want to talk about a couple of characteristics that have made you successful in your own words. And you mentioned that being empathetic is among the most important characteristics of being a CSO. Why?
Well, it's funny because, if I know one of the questions you want to ask is, what is one lesson you learned? I can't emphasize enough that empathy to me is one of the most critical leadership characteristics that I think is critical, at least to this work. And, we're having a lot of discussion right now in this world of AI. You can't do a podcast without mentioning AI at least once. So I'll mention it.
Okay.
But, all companies are trying to understand how to adopt and learn and leverage AI. And that requires significant change management. I think the work I do also requires some change management. What does change management really mean? Well, at the core of it, empathy has to be, one of the core values and characteristics that one brings to a change management kind of culture, if you will, because you have to meet people where they're at. And so, going back to the point, I have a small team, I have big enterprise targets, which means I have to mobilize everybody to do this, but I don't have the power to do it, so to speak. I don't own the P&L. I don't own the divisional, targets, operating targets, or anything like that. So I have to understand what drives them, meet them where they're at. And that's empathy. That's putting yourself in other people's shoes. And that's, I just think, when you're trying to drive change, that's fundamentally critical. And not just to understand what makes them successful, but also understand what are the barriers and why are those barriers, and then hit them head on. And you can't do that unless you have empathy. So, why is something a challenge or a problem for someone? You have to kind of dig into that. And to me, that's what empathy is.
That's great. Thank you. Well, since you brought up AI, this is a whole nother podcast, but I'll just ask one question. How will AI significantly impact sustainability?
Yeah. And this question comes up every day, every discussion on the internal side and how we use AI to, there's some really exciting developments we're exploring, but even outside on accelerating material science. So what does AI do? AI is so powerful in taking reams of data and making sense of it very quickly and helping you get to new solutions exponentially more quickly than one would have with lots of trial and error and lab work and blah, blah, blah. So, we're looking at that for plastic solutions, for instance.
Yeah.
So, it can be very powerful. And of course, it can be very powerful in the wrong way too, but that's just, the world is going to have to work on the governance of it all. So it's interesting times. It's scary. But I think, if we can all build the right values and trust foundation to use it in a proper way, I think it's very exciting.
And do you worry about dehumanizing the experience of being an employee and being in a large organization like Colgate?
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother topic, but I do think that's at the core of it. When I said we have to build a foundation of values and trust behind it, I do think at the core of it, we have to have the human in mind, and how, even if you think about our products and how we go to market, because there's going to be agentic shopping and all of that.
Right.
What are the implications between, the traditional retail experience versus the more, robotic experience? So humanization, human impact has to be at the core of the discussion. I agree with that. I'm not expert enough or cleared with my Corp Com team to talk further on that topic at this point.
But we can offer to our listeners that we actually wrote a guide called Purpose and AI to really say that purpose is the real selection of everything an organization does, like your values and trust. And then AI can flow from that. So we'll put that in our show notes too. We're getting to the bottom of this conversation, but I love it. So we'll have to have a part 2. But I always love to end with a few of the, the fast, simple answers, the lightning round. So no right or wrong, but and these are more about work than the ones you've done in the past, which have been about personal, like aisle seat or window seat. No, not that.
Yeah.
So what's the one word that best describes your work?
I thought about it. I think partnership. It's just internally and externally.
Okay. What keeps you hopeful when the days this work feels heavy? And I'm sure it does a lot.
I think you got to keep yourself grounded in, we said values and trust, but pragmatism. You have to be pragmatic. And ironically, in a world where we seem to be swaying one way or the other, just try to stay pragmatic.
Great. That's excellent. Okay. What's one lesson you've learned from your work you couldn't have learned anywhere else?
Well, and that's where I chose, this has always been part of my leadership style is empathy, but I think it really honed my empathy leadership skills. I think it's critical to drive change and to see things from other people's point of view.
Super. That's really lovely. What's one small action people can take to advance purpose or to create impact in their own communities?
Everybody's different. They have their own passions, spaces for passion. I think, pick one, whether it's recycling, conserving water, turning off the lights, and build your own deep awareness around it, and then become an advocate. So I guess what is one thing people can do is, if you're passionate about something, become an advocate.
There you go.
Educate others. Yeah.
And that's lovely that you didn't say brush twice a day for 2 minutes.
That's true. Do that too.
No, I would do that. Okay. And then if you could leave our listeners with one idea or feeling today.
Just win.
Oh, look at that. You're so great. You're so great. You're very, very focused and great communicator.
Repetitive.
But you have to penetrate. Yeah. You've got, 34,000 colleagues and, all the countries around the world and your retailers and your infrastructure. So that's great. I always like to give the last word. I give the mic over to you. And I'm sure there's lots of things that you could say, but is there one additional sign off or a thing you want to emphasize or that I just like to let you share?
Brush twice a day. No, just kidding. I think just that, I learned something about myself along the way that I guess I'm an eternal optimist, because you can't not be and be in this role. But, I guess I think we all have to get back to the foundation of our values and trust. And, always try to look for the good in others. That's the empathy thing, and try to understand where they're coming from. I mean, we kind of already said it, but this in this world today, this just getting back to core foundation and trying to work through these things together is absolutely fundamental.
That's wonderful. I have one other question to ask, which is, you've got 4 kids. And I assume they're all Gen Zers. So do they say, hey, Mom, they know what you do. You should do, what do they say? If they do.
Yeah, no, they do. Well, strangely, and I don't think they realized it, they've all gone into kind of fields, and I won't rattle them all off, but fields that are, tangentially related to sustainability, electric planes, more urban, sustainable urban designs, things like this. But what do they tell me? They think I know nothing and they know everything.
Oh no.
No, I want them to follow their passion and, be independent. And they've strangely turned out okay. So that's good.
Oh, you're a good mom. You're
so
very good.
They don't tell me what to do, really. They don't.
Okay.
Maybe it's because I'm too busy telling them what to do. I don't know.
A great manager of all your people, with at work and at home, and your dogs and your cats. So, Ann Tracy, this has been a marvelous conversation. You are so inspirational in so many areas. I would say you're perfect for Purpose 360 because you are a 360 degree. You're an empath. You're an engineer. You talk about values and trust and collaboration and value creation. You're just terrific. So I know this is going to be a wonderfully shared podcast, and hopefully in the future we can have you back for some additional conversation.
It was fun. Very fun. Thank you, Carol.